The wagon wheels creaked like they were whispering secrets to the dust, as Leela May Hartwell sat stiff-backed beneath a faded parasol, her gloved hands folded in her lap as though she were attending Sunday service. Instead of being delivered like unwanted freight to a ranch she had never seen, they had not used chains or ropes to send her away. Shame was lighter to carry but far heavier to endure. Back in the parlor of her former in-laws' house, beneath lace curtains and the watchful portraits of long-dead patriarchs, the word had been spoken in a low, poisonous murmur infertile, and once it was said, it clung to her like burrs to a hemline. Her husband had not defended her. He had simply avoided her eyes, as though she were already fading from existence. By the end of that week, arrangements had been made. She would travel west to assist an aging cattleman who needed a housekeeper. It was presented as charity. It felt like exile. The land changed as the days passed, growing wider, harsher, honest in a way polite society had never been. When the wagon finally rolled through the crooked wooden arch that read Hollow Creek Ranch, Leela expected indifference at best. Instead, she found a man standing alone by the corral fence, hat low over his brow, sleeves rolled, watching her arrival as if he'd been waiting not for a worker, but for a storm. His name was Caleb Boone, though most in the territory simply called him Boone, and there was a quiet steadiness about him that unsettled her more than cruelty would have. He stepped forward, took her valise without a word about her past, and said only, "Long ride." Supper's warm, no pity, no curiosity, just space. And that space, more than anything, made her chest ache. Hollow Creek Ranch was not grand, but it was alive. The wind combed through tall grasses like invisible fingers, the cattle lowed at dusk, and the mountains in the distance stood like silent witnesses to every sorrow. Carried into that valley, Leela threw herself into work with the desperation of someone trying to outrun a verdict. She scrubbed floors until her knuckles burned, mended shirts by lamplight, baked bread that filled the house with warmth she did not feel inside. The ranch hands eyed her at first with cautious speculation, having heard the whispers carried faster than any wagon. Some expected tears, others expected bitterness. What they got was a woman who woke before dawn and met the day head-on, chin lifted, as though daring it to break her. Boone observed quietly. He noticed how she hummed hymns when she thought no one was listening, how she paused to stroke the old ranch dog behind its ears, how she never once spoke ill of the people who had sent her away. One evening, as the sky burned orange and purple, a calf was born weak and trembling in the mud. The men muttered that it wouldn't last. Leela knelt in the muck without hesitation, cradling the fragile creature against her skirts, whispering encouragement as though it could understand. She stayed through the cold night, feeding it by hand, warming it with her own body heat. When dawn broke and the calf wobbled to its feet, Boone's respect settled deep and immovable. He had seen women with softer hands turn away from hardship. This one leaned into it, and something in him, long dormant, stirred. Rumors did not stop at the ranch gates. A neighboring widow arrived one afternoon with thinly veiled curiosity, pretending to deliver preserves while scanning Lila's figure, as if infertility could be spotted like a stain. Leela met her gaze with unflinching calm, discussing weather and cattle prices as though her worth had never been questioned. That composure fascinated Boone. He had known loss. His own wife had died years earlier in childbirth, taking both her life and their child in a single cruel sweep, and since then, he had built walls higher than his barn rafters. Love, to him, had been a gamble he had already lost. Yet here was a woman branded for something beyond her control, carrying humiliation with a grace that humbled him. One night, during a thunderstorm that rattled shutters and shook the earth, lightning struck the far pasture fence, sending cattle into a panicked stampede. Chaos erupted. Ranch hands scrambled. Boone rode hard into the storm, and to his shock, Leela followed on horseback, skirts tied up, fearlessly steering strays back toward safety. Rain plastered her hair to her cheeks, mud streaked her gloves, but she did not falter. When the storm finally broke and the herd settled, she laughed, a clear, unrestrained sound that cut through the darkness like sunrise. Boone looked at her then not as an obligation delivered by cruel relatives, not as a woman defined by what she could not give, but as a force of nature in her own right. And in that laughter, Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that neither of them were as broken as the world had declared. They stood beneath the dripping eaves, breathless and soaked, and for the first time since she had been cast aside, Leela felt not like a burden, but like she belonged somewhere. Boone tipped his hat slightly, rainwater streaming down his jaw, and said, "You ride like you were born to it." She answered softly, "Maybe I was just waiting for someone to let me try." And in that simple exchange, the foundation shifted. What had begun as exile was quietly becoming refuge. By the time autumn painted Hollow Creek Ranch in gold and rust, Leela Mae Hartwell no longer walked the grounds like a guest seeking permission. She moved with confidence, issuing gentle instructions to ranch hands, reorganizing supplies, even suggesting improvements to winter feed storage that saved Boone both coin and worry. The valley had begun to whisper new rumors, ones less cruel and more curious. They spoke of the so-called infertile bride who had revived a failing orchard with careful pruning and patience. They spoke of how the ranch house windows glowed warmer at night, how laughter sometimes drifted across the fields. What they did not see were the quiet conversations on the porch after supper, when Boone would carve small pieces of wood into shapes: a horse, a bird, once even a delicate rose, and Leela would read aloud from weathered books she'd carried from her former life. In those evenings, the silence between them was no longer heavy. It was companionable, stitched together by shared understanding. Boone began to tell her about his late wife, about the child they had lost, about the guilt that had convinced him he was cursed to bring sorrow to any woman he loved. Leela listened without interruption, her hand resting near his but never demanding more than he was ready to give. When she finally spoke of her own failed marriage, she did so not with anger but with quiet clarity. "I was measured like livestock," she admitted, "as if my only value was in what I could produce." Boone's jaw tightened at that. "You ain't cattle," he said firmly. "You're the bravest soul I've seen ride into a storm." It was not poetry. It was truth. And truth, she realized, was far more powerful. Winter came early and cruel that year. Snow swallowed fence posts, and supplies ran thin. A neighboring rancher fell ill, leaving behind two small children, with no one to tend them while their mother struggled to keep livestock alive. Without hesitation, Leela organized meals, mended clothing, and spent days teaching the children letters by the fire while their mother worked the fields. She did not mother them with desperation or sorrow. She simply offered warmth where it was needed. Boone watched as those children clung to her skirts, their laughter filling rooms that had once echoed with his own grief. He had believed fatherhood stolen from him forever, but witnessing Lila's tenderness awakened something he had buried beneath years of dust and duty. One evening, as snow fell thick and silent, he found her in the barn, cradling a newborn foal that had lost its mother. The sight struck him deep. "You don't have to carry every broken thing," he murmured. She looked up, eyes reflecting lantern light. "Maybe I don't," she said gently, "but I want to." In that moment, Boone understood that her capacity to nurture had never been absent. It had simply been denied the chance to bloom. And it was not limited to childbirth. It extended to calves, to children, to wounded men who thought themselves beyond saving. The realization shattered the last of his resistance. Spring arrived like forgiveness. Wildflowers dotted the hills, and Hollow Creek Ranch thrived in ways it never had before. Word spread that Boone planned to attend the town social for the first time in years. Whispers intensified when he arrived, not alone, but with Leela at his side, her dress simple yet radiant against the lantern-lit hall. Conversations hushed, eyes judged, but Boone did not waver. When the music began, he extended his hand. "Dance with me," he said, loud enough for all to hear. It was not merely an invitation. It was a declaration. Leela hesitated only a heartbeat before placing her hand in his. They moved across the wooden floor with unpolished grace. Yet there was a harmony between them that silenced every doubter. In that dance, she was not the woman sent away in disgrace. She was not defined by absence. She was chosen. When the song ended, Boone did not release her. Instead, he faced the crowd and said, steady and sure, "This woman is the heart of my ranch and the best part of my life." Gasps rippled. Lila's eyes filled, not with shame, but with something fierce and luminous. Later, beneath a sky scattered with stars, Boone knelt in the dust outside the hall, offering not wealth or promises of heirs, but partnership. "I don't need children to prove a legacy," he told her. "Loving you is enough." Tears slipped freely down her cheeks as she whispered yes. And in that yes, every cruel word spoken against her dissolved into nothing. Hollow Creek Ranch flourished in the years that followed, not because it gained heirs by blood, but because it became a haven for the weary, the orphaned, the discarded. Leela and Boone built a life stitched together by resilience, laughter, and unwavering devotion. The world had sent her west to shame her, believing her empty. Instead, she became the one woman the cowboy ever loved, and together they proved that worth is not measured by what the body can produce, but by the boundless strength of a heart that refuses to break.